Welcome back to the table. Gen Con is behind us,
Yep.
but Lorcana is not. Lorcana is right here in front of us. I mean, it's also kind of behind us too because, let's face it, folks, Gen Con was all about Lorcana.
Lorcana's behind us, it's with us, it's in our future,
It's
tomorrow,
surrounding
it's
us.
yesterday. We're going to be doing a lot of Lorcana, and we're going to be doing a lot of Lorcana stuff, primarily because I do really enjoy Lorcana. I'll say that. While we talk about Lorcana today, we're definitely going to talk about some of the cons, because I get why people love the game, and I get why people don't love the game. I'm right in the middle, but I love Disney.
And we're going to, for this conversation, by the way, if we hadn't mentioned it, we just played it. We played it a couple times, and you're saying, wow, you got some Lorcana? No, we did not get Lorcana at Gen Con.
Yeah.
One of Ryan's friends.
Yeah, big thank you to Brian. If you're watching, Brian, thank you. He was able to get Lorcana product. And also, a big thanks to our community. When I put out a message, I was like, who has some Lorcana? I had people all over the U.S. being like, if you need me to mail it, I'll mail it. So that's,
wow.
Thank you all, but we did get some.
Please, if you were able to score Lorcana, don't mail it. Certainly not even to us. But we're taking very good care of this. It was sleeved by Brian before he sent it to us. We might unsleeve some to take pictures, but we will have very clean hands as we do. We won't mess anything up. So, but like I said, we just played it.
And I've played it several times now. I got to play it at Gen Con 2. I have a friend from a channel, Cardboard Camp, that also waited in line and got all the stuff. So we played. I got to try all the different starter decks before I brought it here to teach David.
Yeah.
So I would say, I've played 5 or 6 total games now. So
yeah, and I've played 2. And if you watch the channel, you know these kinds of games, Magic, all those sorts of trading card games, are certainly more in Ryan's wheelhouse than they are mine. But with that said, Lorcana promises to be, and I will tell you right now, is a more accessible trading card game for sure. It's pretty straightforward. If you've played any in the past, you're going to see a lot of things that are familiar or similar. A lot of different terms, though. They had to call everything different. You're not exhausting, you're exerting.
Yeah,
there's not mana, there's ink.
Yep.
But that's fine, that's fine.
It is fun. I mean, you're going to see every kind of card game kind of brings their own, they try to bring their own thematic names to whatever. You're going to see a lot of people call this Magic the Gathering Light, and while that is true in some ways, it's actually very much not true in others. I think that this game is at its heart very, very different than Magic the Gathering in a lot of different ways. First of all, Magic is a lot of just like reacting to your opponent, acting and reacting and waiting, and there's a whole lot of complicated things in Magic as far as being able to play on your opponent's turn and counter things and respond to things. There's none of that in Lorcana. Mm-hmm. There's no in response to or counterspell or...
Not that we have, anyway.
Oh, no, there isn't any. There's nothing, at least so far in this first block.
That's what I meant.
Nothing that exists that you do on your opponent's turn. You are only ever taking your actions on your turn, which can leave it to feel a little bit like you're just watching your opponent play. You're not really reacting to that. I think maybe that's a negative that some people have mentioned.
A little bit. And speaking of your turn, I'm going to give you, in fact, I'm going to have Ryan grade me here as I give you a brief description of what you're doing in this game, because he's the one that taught me. So if I do this wrong, let's blame it on Ryan. But in a general sense, on your turn, you're going to be drawing a card, unless you're the first player.
On the first turn,
and then one card out of your hand you can add to your inkwell, but the card has to have a certain symbol around the number in the upper left-hand corner that sort of allows it to be a card that's added that way.
Yep.
This is effectively what you're going to be using to power play cards. So if a card needs a 2 in the upper left-hand corner, I need to have 2 ink down here to sort of exert or
tap,
whatever you might say.
Whatever you call it at home.
To get these cards played out. When that card comes out, it cannot be used that turn, but it is not exerted.
Right.
And then any cards that you have out, you can activate, and you exert them, and you could take actions with them. And a couple of those main actions are to quest, and every card, at least most of the characters I've seen, have some sort of quest rating. So I could exert Mickey Mouse here, and this is one of many Mickey Mouses, by the way. To quest for 1. That just gives me 1 point. There are other cards that I had. I think Simba or Mufasa.
Quest for 3, maybe?
Quest for 3. Yeah. It's all in a race to get 20. The other thing you can do is, what do they call it? Not attack. Challenge, one of your opponent's character cards. And this is effectively a fight, and it's a mutual damage, so whatever value, strength value they have, they do that, and then there's defense. And you're basically taking cards out that way.
Yeah, I mean, that's a solid A, but...
Back and forth, that way.
I want to expand upon a lot of that.
Go on.
Well, only because these are things that, when you talk about them, sound very simple and basic, but there's actually a lot to unpack there. First of all, this idea of adding cards to your ink pool from your hand. So it's an interesting decision, first of all, because you can never get these cards back. So if you have to look at your starting hand and decide, like, well, if I ink a certain character and put it face down, I'm never getting that character.
Oh, that card anyway.
That version, this specific one, right? So if you have multiples in the deck, like I just decreased my chance of playing it. So you might have some very good cards early that might be more beneficial to turn into ink to let you play some of your lower cost cards instead of waiting until you have like 6 ink to play it. However, the positive thing about this that maybe you wouldn't think about on your first play, but I definitely think about, you're never drawing lands. You're never in that situation like Magic where you're like, another land, another land. Even when you get down to no cards in your hand, it's a guarantee 100% that whatever card you draw, you're going to get to play.
You'll be able to play.
You'll be able to play, especially as you get later in the game and you end up with the highest I've seen is a 6 cost. So when you end up with 6 ink in your pool, you can play anything in your deck. So I actually kind of like that, especially for beginners. There's that term you hear in Magic, mana flooded. It's never going to happen in this game. You also don't need to worry about your mana representation when you're building a deck, because every card, now you do want to make sure that you have enough of those cards that have that ink symbol on them, because you don't want to you want to at least play one every turn. It's okay to maybe skip a turn or something. But again, unlike Magic, you can almost always play a card. So that curve is very smooth in Lorcana, I would say, compared to Magic, where you could get in trouble where you get mana shorted very early and just can't play things. So that's a big difference.
And another thing going on here is damage will be tracked on cards. So if we do, what do you call it again? Not
challenging
a challenge. When you do challenge someone, if damage is done but it's not enough to banish them, they're going to have damage counters on them. And I personally kind of like that because it makes it so that it's not just I really have to just build up before I can definitely take this guy out. You can have that damage, and then in your next turn, you know that you're going to have another person that might activate to finish them off without being banished themselves, potentially.
Yeah, and one thing David didn't mention about that whole challenge system is that you can only challenge cards that have already been exerted. So you have to kind of wait for your opponent to potentially quest when you exert it, and they become vulnerable to attack or to be challenged then, and then you can attack them. So again, that's another difference from Magic. In Magic, when you are being attacked, you get to decide what to block with, or you get to decide if your characters are at risk. In this, the decision comes for questing. You have to quest to score points. Every time you quest, you get a certain number of lore. So it's very valuable to quest, but okay, if you've got a card out there that's like when you had Mufasa in play, who can do a lot of damage, you've got to risk it. You know that there's a good chance that they're going to take out your card. Some of these cards have very strong abilities, and they might even have global effects that affect your deck or the cards you're playing that you don't want to lose. So every time you commit to either doing that quest, or even if I use this card to challenge an opponent, I might have enough to knock Mickey Mouse out of the game, but then that leaves my Duke vulnerable to be knocked out next turn. So that is where a lot of the tension in this game comes. There's not a direct counter, but you're going to be trying to eliminate your opponent's best questers, or at least put pressure on them so that they don't feel like they can just freely quest every round because they don't know when you're going to strike and potentially banish their character. So that's where the tension comes in for me, at least.
Yeah, and not so much on the tension front, but in terms of what brings the flavor to the game. Obviously, you've got this IP, and I want to share this thought because I have 2 different feelings here. One, you've got a lot of items that will do things. I have this coconut basket here that is kind of an ongoing effect, as whenever you play a character, you may remove up to 2 damage from chosen character. So I can get that out there. There's other cards that we saw even in our play that I was able to get rid or banish one of his items, things like that. But the IP, at least when we played, we weren't spending a lot of time really soaking in the IP. As I played. I was like, I'm going to play Aurora, and look what she does, because and that's so perfect for Aurora. There's a little bit of that, but I didn't feel the theme and the IP oozing out of the gameplay experience. I mean, it's obviously there. So you get a character in your hand like Mufasa or Simba, and you're like, oh. Yeah. Not to mention they're powerful cards. And it feels really exciting to play it. And some of the mechanics sometimes go hand in hand with like maybe the theme of the character.
Yeah, Aladdin steals points from your opponent, which feels very thematic to Aladdin.
Exactly. Hercules, I think,
Hercules
stood
block
in and
guard
as a bodyguard.
Yeah.
That sort of stuff. Some of that makes sense, but the mechanics took center stage for my plays in this case.
Well, for sure, your decisions are mechanical, but and even so, for me, coming from competitive card games like Magic, when you're building a deck, I'm not necessarily looking at who I'm putting in that deck. And the deck building in this game is very cool. There's different colors of ink, and you can mix 2 colors together to build your deck. So you're kind of pulling from those colors, trying to build synergies, just like deck building. But I'm not the one that's like, oh, I want to make a great Mouse Detective deck. But there are people out there that would. They would put the characters first and say, well, I just want a Lion King deck. So let's get Scar and Simba, Mufasa, Nala. Like, let's just combine. I think those all are different colors, but whatever. Like, they'll try to build a Lion King deck or an Aladdin deck. And I think that the fact that you can do that and still be competitive at some casual level in the game is good, because this is going to be a lot of people's first entry into CCGs.
Yeah.
So having an IP where you already kind of know who the characters are, I think that does help.
Yeah, no, it for sure helps. So let's talk about who we think this is for briefly, and who we think it might not be for.
Yeah. I just mentioned a little bit of who it's for.
Yes.
A little bit. It's definitely for people, people who love Disney. Do we even need to say that? If you love Disney, you're going to love this game regardless, because it's just fun playing in this world and having these Disney characters.
I think that is the big draw. I also think maybe people who've never really wanted to get into TCGs, this is a very accessible starting point. With that said, there are plenty of accessible starting points in TCGs, I believe.
That's true, there are.
So it's not like this is unique in that respect. But when you mix that with the IP, if you're a big Disney fan and you've never really wanted to try a TCG, maybe this one's worth trying. Get a couple starter decks and see how it goes, and maybe, who knows, you're off to the races and buying every card you can.
Also, if you are a Magic player, or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or One Piece, or whatever competitive card game you play, if you're one of those players and you're okay and you acknowledge the fact that this game is going to be a lighter experience, this is very good. It's a chance to play a CCG with people you can never get to play those other games with you.
Sure.
I could play this with my nephew. I could teach my sister this game, or my mom this game, who aren't big gamers, and I can get a little bit of that same satisfaction that I'd get playing a CCG. And the other thing too is, since it is so accessible and very easy to learn, and if you build a deck for someone, they can pretty much challenge you on an even foot. First time gamer, you're still going to struggle a little bit, and the more experience you have, sure, you're going to do better. But you can build a pretty good deck, and they can know how to wield it. Whereas like other games, you're like, okay, well, you have to play this card first, then trigger this card and get these 6 things out.
No, it's pretty
And
straightforward.
now you're effective.
I would say the only potential thing to consider there is probably a lower age limit as it relates to the text that needs to be read on a lot of these cards. There's a fair amount of text on these cards.
For sure.
Some of it's flavor, but some of the text here is definitely going to take someone of a certain age. Now, in terms of who it's not for, I'm going to speak on one side of things, and you can elaborate or go in a different direction. But I don't play a lot of these games, and when I play one of these games, one of the things I look for is something that feels unique, new, fresh, and different. This one, I don't think, brought a lot of that. There are some little things, some of the tweaks we've talked about in terms of like, oh, you can only challenge people who are exerted, those sorts of things. But other than that, there was nothing like, I didn't have any of those moments where I'm learning the game, I'm like, oh, that's clever. Like, there was no unique mechanic. It felt like what you'd expect from a trading card game in a world where trading card games have existed for many, many years.
Sure. And I would agree with that, and you're not wrong. I have a little bit of a different opinion, only in that I've seen a lot of launches for a lot of CCGs, right? And so what we have here with these starter decks, there is not a lot of that like, oh, cool feeling. because they didn't really create these to synergize really well. They're almost on autopilot to a certain extent.
Sure.
Like, you know what you're doing. I think that they've done a good foundation here. But again, for who it's not for, if you're expecting the next Magic the Gathering, or if you're expecting the next game that's going to swarm the tournament scene, I don't think this game is it. This game is very loose. It has there's already some decks online that people are saying are almost unbeatable. So there's definitely some, wiggle room that needs to be ironed out over the course of this game. But as far as the foundation goes, I think this is a very solid foundation that they could potentially build on. So while I'm saying, there's a whole maybe group of people that this game is not for, I think it's worth also waiting to see. Like, see what the next set looks like. See how they build upon this when they start introducing new card types and maybe new gameplay mechanics. Like, Magic does that all the time. Magic's been out for almost 30 years. It's had, so much time to build up to what it is right now. If you go back in time to like early Magic, it was also very simple. So I'm not going to call this one way or the other yet. I think it's a promising start, but I really do want to see where it goes.
Yeah, so that is our sort of first impressions after just having played Lorcana a few times in Ryan's case. We will have some content up very soon. If not already, we're going to have a live stream of us playing. It will likely be Ryan destroying me.
No, I don't know.
But we'll see. It can go either way, like Ryan said.
You've already won one of the games that we played.
That is true. I can't complain too much. But if you have any questions at all about the game, please make them in the comments below. We'll get down there and answer whatever we can. Until next time, of course, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.